I've hit top 500 both seasons of Marvel Rivals, primarily playing strategist, aka support. So today I'm going to be sharing with you the 10 most common mistakes I see low elo support players make and how you can fix them. These are some of the most fundamental mistakes I see that I believe if you focus on fixing them, you can easily climb to Diamond or Grandmaster. I've talked about a couple of these previously, but this is going to be specifically on how these affect you as a support player, and I will be including examples from my own games as well. So the first mistake I want to talk about is maybe the most fundamental aspect of the entire strategist/support role, and that is healing priority. Basically, this is who you should be healing and when. So what is the correct target priority for healing? The most basic way to think about it is to ask yourself, who is low HP and in immediate danger of dying? It could be your tank who is absorbing a ton of damage in the front line, or it could be your other support standing right next to you in the back line. The point here is that one singular person should never be taking all of your focus. You don't need to make sure your tank is at 100% HP the entire game, because it usually comes at the cost of you not paying attention to your other teammates who might need immediate healing. If nobody else is in danger of dying, then sure, you can pocket your tank or duelist to full HP or look for an opportunity to do damage instead. I personally prioritize keeping teammates alive in the order of supports, then duelists, then tanks. Keeping yourself alive should be your #1 priority along with your other support, because if one of you dies, there is just simply not going to be enough healing to out-sustain the enemy team's damage without an ult. Duelists are second priority because they also have an incredibly small health pool like supports, but if one of your 2 or 3 duelists dies, the fight isn't instantly over, as tanks can output a lot of damage on their own to keep pressure on the enemy team. Tanks are the lowest priority in a neutral 6v6 game state because they have the biggest health pool and a lot of survivability. So if you need to take a few seconds to heal someone else up who is at 10% HP, your 50% HP tank will be fine. That's why in general, unless your tank is taking all the focus from the other team, you don't need to be babysitting them. That being said, don't neglect your front line completely, because if your front line falls apart, your team will just get picked apart from there. Knowing who to heal can be extremely situational, but to sum all of this up as simply as possible, stop spamming your healing on teammates who are not in danger of dying. Be aware of all of your teammates and prioritize your healing on critical HP teammates in the order of supports, duelists, and then tanks. Mistake 2 is related to positioning, and that is overstaying at your spot. Whether you're in an off angle or grouped with your team, overstaying your position makes you a really easy target. Not only does it lose value the longer you're in a spot as enemies become more aware of you, it gives the enemy team time to set up a play to pick you off. I don't recommend staying in a spot for more than a few seconds unless the enemy team just isn't looking at you. As soon as you start getting pressured and losing value, whether it's because you can't heal your team as well or you can't put out damage on the enemies, you should consider finding a different spot and repositioning. Before we get into mistake number 3, if you're finding this video helpful at all, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it really helps me out. And if you guys would like to watch me play the game live in top 500 ranked, ask questions, and just come hang out, I stream every day over at twitch.tv/brush. Mistake number 3 is extremely common in every single rank of Marvel Rivals, and that is using stats to judge your value and impact. You shouldn't be using the scoreboard and your stats to decide how effective you are, because at face value, they just don't provide enough context. Rivals is an incredibly nuanced game with a ton of different heroes with a ton of different playstyles, so your hero's effectiveness shouldn't be determined by the number on your screen. The easiest example here is Mantis. While Mantis sometimes lacks in healing, she still has an incredible amount of utility through her damage boost, which isn't necessarily represented on the scoreboard. Maybe you only have 10,000 total healing at the end of the game, but between damage boosting yourself and damage boosting your teammates, you could easily help put out an extra 15,000 damage throughout a game. The scoreboard also doesn't represent things like how long you were able to distract the enemy team on an off angle, or how many times you forced an enemy ult because your damage boosted teammate was pumping damage. Instead of looking at the scoreboard and saying, there's nothing more I can do, I have 40,000 healing, ask yourself, am I playing my hero well enough to take advantage of what they specialize in and have a valuable impact on the game? Mistake number 4 is not using your cooldowns efficiently. I've talked about this many times, but it's incredibly important as a support player because your cooldowns are often going going to be what keeps yourself and your team alive under high pressure. If you're holding your abilities too long, you're going to miss a ton of opportunities to save yourself, save teammates, or even find kills in general. Let's use Mantis's sleep as an example. Her sleep is a 15-second cooldown, meaning 4 times per minute you have an opportunity to slow the enemy team down, force cooldowns, or even find a kill. Don't wait for 2 minutes to find the perfect opportunity to try and sleep the enemy duelist because you want to get a kill. Use it on the tank who's too far up or the support who is out of position on the side. Even if it doesn't secure a kill, it puts pressure on the enemy team and forces them to respond in some way. This doesn't just apply to cooldowns that can be used aggressively either. Dagger's Dagger Storm ability has a 12-second cooldown, meaning every minute there are 5 opportunities to give your team a burst of sustain. You don't need to wait until someone is about to die to use it. Throw it on the wall next to your duelist who is out of line of sight, or on your tanks who are in the front line so you don't need to pocket heal them as much and you can make sure the rest of your team isn't about to die. The point to all of this is that if you aren't using your cooldowns, there is no pressure on the enemy team and none of this can happen. This isn't to say just randomly throw out your abilities whenever you feel like it. Have a goal in mind. The only time I recommend holding your cooldowns deliberately is to either counter a dive to help you survive or to counter an ultimate if you're able to. One last thing to remember is that it's better to use your abilities poorly than to not be using them at all. Here's a clip from one of my games showing you how I perfectly cycled my Mantis sleep to win a team fight. I see the entire enemy team jump through the strange portal and I throw my sleep just into the clump. I don't hold it, I don't try and perfectly line it up, but it does happen to hit the Moon Knight, which secures me a kill. Now, it could have hit any single person on that team and it would have slowed down the team massively. So I'm able to isolate the 1v1. I notice Luna's alone on the side and I jump down on her instead. By then, my sleep is already back up and it allows me to sleep and isolate her in the 1v1 for another kill, winning us the fight. Moving on, we have mistake number 5, which is a very simple one to fix, but still far too common, and that is not communicating when you're using your support ultimate. Simply telling your team you're going to ult first to avoid stacking the big sustained support ults like Luna, Cloak and Dagger, Mantis is massively important to keeping a good ult economy. As it stands in the current meta, whichever team uses their sustain ults more efficiently usually wins the fight. When you stack 2 sustain support ults at once, sure, you may win that fight, but now the enemy team is going to come back and take the next fight easily while they have a sustain ult and your team doesn't. So whether you type it, ping it, or say it in voice chat, communicate with your team and figure out who is going to be using their support ult first. Another benefit to this is that it gives your team a heads up so they don't have to worry about dying and they can continue to hold or fight for space. The next mistake I'm going to be talking about here is not looking for opportunities to do damage often enough. Now, before I go into why this is important, I want to be clear that as a support, you always need to make sure that you're doing your best to keep your teammates alive. You should not be doing damage at the cost of your teammates dying if it's possible to save them. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about when and why you should be doing damage. You should only be looking for damage when your teammates are not in danger of dying. This can be before the fight starts, during the fight, especially if your team is still healthy and there are easily killable targets, or after a fight when you and your team are setting up in an advanced position, just for a few examples. Basically, if nobody needs to be healed, this is when you should be looking to do as much damage as possible before you need to heal again. So why should you be doing damage as a support? Doing consistent damage not only will help build your ultimate faster than just healing, but it's also going to put a ton of pressure onto the enemy team. It can enable your team to finish kills on damaged targets, force cooldowns or resources from the enemy team to save their teammates, waste the enemy team's time by being a distraction, or even just delay the push from the other team because they need to wait for healing. Finding opportunities to do damage is the most consistent way to have an impact on the game as a support player by applying a ton of extra pressure. And pretty much the only support that actually struggles to do consistent damage is Rocket Raccoon. To keep it simple, if your teammates aren't in danger of dying, don't sit around and do nothing. Look for opportunities to do damage to the enemy team. It applies a lot more pressure than you realize, even if you're not the one getting all the kills. So this is a game of top 500 ranked, and look at how I find opportunities for damage in this fight. So I ult forward as I see my team is fighting really far ahead and they're getting low. I know that this is a winnable fight if I get the ult down, and I know that nobody behind me has any danger of dying. So as soon as I ult forward, I see the backline is isolated, and that's when I go into cloak form and start looking for damage because I know that I don't have to heal anyone behind me. So the Bucky is completely isolated. He's trying to pull me out of my ult, but he does die for it and can't make it into his invisible woman's ult. And because I know my ult is running out soon, I turn around to go make sure my teammates are going to be okay. But as I see that my team is still healthy because of my ult, I'm able to do free damage on the Namor and trade the kill. So I just told you when and why you should be doing damage as a support, but how do you safely do damage as a support? This is where mistake number 7 comes in, which is not playing on off angles. Put simply, an off angle is a position that is slightly to the side of where your team is grouped. This could be slightly to the left or right, or it could be something like being on high ground when your team is on low ground. Something to keep in mind is that your off angle position should always be near cover, so that way as soon as the enemies look at you, you have a spot to disengage to. The goal of an off angle is simply to apply extra pressure to the enemy by safely doing damage. This forces a response from the enemy team either through cooldowns, distracting them, or it might even get you a kill. If the enemy team turns to look at you at your off angle, you disengage and reposition. The goal here is simply to apply more pressure. Anything else you can get, like finding a pick, is just a bonus. Remember, staying alive and keeping your team alive as a support is your priority. So if your team needs help and you can't help them from your off angle, you need to reposition and help them. So this is a game from my GM1 alt account where I was practicing Jeff. I'm going to show you guys just how effective off angles can be and how it easily wins us this first point. So the first thing you should notice here is that I don't just go out the main doors and go up main with my teammates. I go out the side door and I'm immediately going to this side room where the health pack is. And notice how all of the enemies are just looking at my team in main. This is why off angles are so strong. If they're not looking at me, that means I can pressure them for free and get free damage. So I chunk them even lower. I notice my teammates are moving far up. I check to make sure no one needs healing. One thing to make sure is you are always keeping your teammates alive when you can, when you are off angling. So I keep my teammates up. I notice the Strange is 1 HP and I go back to the off angle. Strange dies because he's so far up, and now we just get to walk onto their backline for free. Immediately in the first 19 seconds of the round, we have 3 kills. And look what happens from the enemy perspective when they get pressured on that off angle. So look, the backline immediately gets chunked out and they have to back up because they're in danger of dying, and it leaves their Strange completely isolated in the front line with no help. So Strange just dies for free, and the rest of the team is dead just from that extra pressure on the off angle. And that leads us now into mistake 8, which is not prioritizing staying alive. As a support player, staying alive should be your #1 priority. In the most simple way, you should not be putting yourself in a terrible position to save someone's life. There will be moments where you need to let someone like a duelist die because they are terribly out of position, and you can't just run into the open surrounded by 20 different angles to save them. If you die, it means that the entire burden of healing is now on your other support, and without the use of a sustaining support ultimate, it's nearly impossible to out-sustain that damage if the enemy team has a numbers advantage. And this should also be your mindset just as a ranked player. You are the single common denominator in all of your games, meaning it's in your best interest to play like you decide the outcome of the game. The longer you're alive, the more uptime you have, meaning you can do more healing, do more damage, and build more ults. In regards to staying alive, we have to talk about positioning. Bad positioning is the easiest way to get picked off, especially as a support hero that has a much smaller health pool. I've talked about positioning briefly in this video, but the most common mistakes I see when it comes to having bad positioning is either being overextended or not playing near natural cover. First, let's talk about overextending. Overextending is just being in a position too far forward that your team can't help you in. As a support, you need to avoid being in the front line. That's the job of your tanks to soak up damage. I often see this happen when a support player tunnel visions on keeping someone like a dive duelist alive, and it's completely unintentional. But all it takes is being too far forward for just a moment to get focused and bursted from 100% HP to 0. Play far enough back so that your tanks will be the priority of the enemy team, but close enough to help them if they need it. The second mistake in reference to bad positioning is not using natural cover. Natural cover is any structure on the map that can absorb damage for you. A shield from a tank is not natural cover because it could go away at any moment. So when you are positioning, you should always be thinking to yourself, where can I move to if I start getting pressured and need to wait for healing or cooldowns? It could be the corner around a wall, a pillar, or even a vending machine. Always position yourself with intention, don't just move around for no reason, and before you reposition, you should always make sure that you're doing it around natural cover. Playing around natural cover and knowing when to use it is the easiest way to take less damage and stay alive longer. The last mistake I want to go over is not tracking the enemy ultimates. Knowing who has their ult on the enemy team will decide how you can use your support ult. If you track the enemy duelist ults and you know the enemy Psylocke has ult and you have your Luna Snow ult, you know that you need to use your ult reactively to help counter it and save your team, or there's a good chance you will get punished for it. If you know that Psylocke doesn't have her ult because you've been tracking it, now you know that you can use your ult when your team is in danger of dying and losing a fight without being punished for it. It also can give you an idea of how your team needs to play to take back momentum. If you know both enemy supports have ults, but your team only has one, now you know your team needs to find a way to force one out, or there's a good chance you will lose the next fight when the enemy team out sustains you. The easiest way to track ults if you aren't sure of the timings is to just look at the ult charge of the enemy who kills you when you die, as it will show you in the kill cam. Another rule of thumb is that in mirror matchups, for example Luna versus Luna, the same heroes will get their ults at usually around the same time. So those are the 10 most common mistakes I see from low elo support players in Marvel Rivals. I hope this video helped you out, and if it did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing because it really helps me out. Thank you all so much for watching, take care, and good luck with the climb.